The movie begins with a scene where the king is leading his knights against a monstrous dragon. They march to the dragon's cave and find the creature face to face. We then see the dragon breathing fire into the soldiers' faces, burning them to death. Some try to run, but the dragon hunts them all. The king then finds himself alone and surrenders to the creature. The scene then cuts to centuries later, when we meet two sisters, Elodie and Aurea. They are princesses of a poor kingdom surrounded by harsh and barren lands. Their kingdom seems to be collapsing, and the people are now in poverty and starving. People fight over food and struggle to survive. When the sisters enter the room where their parents are, they are greeted by a red priestess who is visiting their kingdom. The priestess is also here to ask their father, Lord Bayford, for Elodie's hand for marriage to the prince of the kingdom of Aurea. It is now understood that Lord Bayford has agreed and consented to the marriage. However, Elodie was reluctant and uncertain about the arrangements, but eventually agreed for the sake of the people's own kingdom's survival. The family of four then sails to head to the kingdom of Aurea, where Elodie is set to marry the handsome prince named Henry. However, when they arrived, the kingdom of Aurea welcomed them with a dragon statue gate. It looks so realistic that the family was frightened at first. Upon arriving at the main city, they are astonished to see the wealth and prosperity of the kingdom. They are welcomed inside the castle by their assistant. The two sisters are mesmerized by the wealth and beauty of the castle. The man took them into their residence room, a luxury room with so much treatment. Elodie is now thinking that this may be the best thing that could happen in her life. She walks around her room and gives herself a fruit treat. When she checks the balcony, she is captivated by a woman in the landscape. But the woman gets inside quickly before she's able to say hello. At night, Elodie stays in her room drawing. She comes out to catch some fresh air, and she sees a flame in the mountains. It is like a fire, but she could have a clear vision. Meanwhile, her sister Aurea arrives to sleep with her. The two are close and talk about their parents that night. It turns out that the woman we have seen is not their mother but their stepmother. Elodie says she wishes their mother was here to see this. The next morning, Elodie met the Queen of Aurea, Isabel, and her future husband, Prince Henry. The Queen and the other adults then went to talk in private, while Elodie and Prince Henry went out alone to spend a day learning about each other. The prince seems to capture the interest of Elodie. She thinks she made the right choice by agreeing to marry the charming prince, who instantly swept her off her feet. While they were walking, they found some horses, and they sneaked the guards out to ride on the fields. The prince is amazed at his skills and asks where she learned them. She says her mother taught her. He then takes her further to show her around the kingdom. Back in the castle, where Queen Isabel and Lord Bayford are speaking privately. When her husband, Lord Bayford, comes out, his wife asks him if there is anything wrong with the queen and if the wedding is still on. Bayford didn't want to explain anything, but roughly, he tells her they were offered a lot of gold as a prize and that the wedding is still on. His wife asks him why he is sad, but he firmly dismisses her and acts strangely towards the topic. Outside, the couples are enjoying their views and learning each other's backgrounds. Henry mentions to her that perhaps they both can travel the world one day, and Elodie tells him she dreams of that day. Meanwhile, the stepmother, Lady Bayford, goes to Queen Isabel to offer her assistance at the wedding ceremony, but to her surprise, Queen Isabel doesn't want her to do anything. Isabel even reminds the woman that they are just in-laws and have nothing to do with becoming a united family. She dismisses her easily and walks away. This intrigues the stepmother, so she senses something is off in this family. At night, she goes to Elodie to warn her and maybe call off the wedding, but their conversation is interrupted by their father. He asks if there is anything wrong, but Elodie assures him all is well. The next morning, the maids started to dress up Elodie for her wedding. She wears a fancy medieval dress for her wedding. Aurea is also there, watching her. Elodie looked as beautiful as ever at her wedding ceremony, kissing Prince Henry, and she is now declared the Princess of Australia. After the celebration, she bids goodbye to her father and stepmother and leaves the castle with her husband Henry. On their way, she asks him where they are going, and he tells her an ancient ceremony is prepared up in the mountains to pay homage to his ancestors. Upon reaching the top, the newlyweds saw Queen Isabel wearing the outfit of a red priestess. Queen Isabel handed Elodie a coin, and a bunch of people were also alongside. However, they are dressed weirdly and have masks on their faces. The two then followed the queen to the altar, where she retold the story of the kingdom. The kingdom of Australia was born when their ancestors first came to the island. They found that a beast also inhabited the land. The beast had a savage bloodlust and destroyed the village. The king gathered his soldiers to avenge his people, but he terribly failed. The beast forced the king to sacrifice his 3 beloved daughters, and in exchange, the beast would let the king's people be. It was either the lives of his daughters or the lives of many more. As much as the king adored his daughters, he was still a dutiful king, and he must protect his people at any cost. A pact was made as the 3 daughters met their end at the belly of the beast, and the kingdom of Aurea was born. Isabel then tells Elodie that this is just a casual sacrifice ceremony to honor their ancestors. Isabel then makes the newlyweds make a blood pact. She cuts Elodie's hand and joins it with Henry's, making her a blood relative of the royal family. After the couple's bloodline mingles, Queen Isabel tells Elodie to throw the coin and complete the ceremony. Elodie threw the coin she was handed into the chasm. Henry then offers his wife an honorable exit from the chambers, so he insists on carrying her. She agrees, but when she closes her eyes and is not looking, he surprisingly confesses sorry and tosses her into the same dark abyss. Elodie screams so loudly as she falls into the chasm, horrified by the reality. She fell unconscious immediately. When waking up, she came to the realization that she was the sacrifice. She calls for help. She instantly hears a growling sound from a distance. She screams in hopelessness and rips her jewelry. She tries to climb the wall, but the height is unreachable. However, in the process, she only hurts herself. While falling down, she sees a bunch of shoes and accessories inside the cave. They are not hers, so she now realizes the family does this as a ritual and has sacrificed countless women. Meanwhile, she sees a distant fluttering from behind, and she looks back to see a light coming from a cave. She approached the light and found a bird caught on fire. After helping the bird, Elodie heard a roar, followed by the screeches of the birds on fire. Dozens of birds are on fire. She then dodged the birds and asked for strength from her late mother. This term seemed to catch the attention of the dragon, and Elodie hid and ran upon seeing the beast. However, the dragon is able to talk, and she asked her what her name was. She told me her name was Elodie and asked what she wanted. The dragon's response is that she wants what she is owed and reveals to her that every generation of her kind must pay. She's confused, but the dragon spoke of the scent of royalty coming from Elodie. She later realized it was Henry's blood mixed with hers that the dragon was smelling and that she was thrown to replace what should have been the queen's daughter. He then breathes her fire, intending to burn her to death, but Elodie manages to run and hide. There, she sees the corpse of the woman she saw on the balcony the other day. Terrified, she kept quiet to prevent herself from facing the same fate. While hiding, a trap catches her feet, and she falls and is stuck to the ground. To her luck, she managed to lift herself up before the additional fire caught her. She was hurt, but only burned her leg. She screams in pain, and the dragon tells her she won't make it long, even though she is a brave one for now. Elodie then uses a sharp blade that was with her costume and cuts her gown to tie it around her wound. She is indeed in a lot of pain at this time and keeps pleading for her mother to help her. After a while, when she couldn't hear the dragon anymore, Elodie used the accessory on her gown to make a light and find her way out of the cave. She then crawled on a narrow path, but she unexpectedly slipped and fell to a lower level. Being the brave woman that she is, she manages to escape from the narrow walls and crawl in the ground to make her way up to a cliff. From there, she sees a glowing cave. She tries to approach it, but she is on a cliff and could possibly die if she tries to jump. She sits down in hopelessness, and there she takes out the ring Henry has put in her fingers and throws it. Her hopes are riven now, so she indeed gathered the courage and jumped to the other side. She slipped, but her dress's accessory luckily got caught between the stones, and Elodie used the sharp object put inside her corset to climb up. She approaches the glowing cave and finds them to be glowworms. Elodie then took a handful of them to serve as a light. She found a puddle of water nearby and approached it to drink some. She drank from the puddle, but it was disgusting, so she stood in the middle of it with her neck craned up, catching the droplets of water falling from the ice shards above. But then the ice started to melt, and the dragon's dark shadow emerged above her. Elodie jumped away in time to dodge the dragon's fire. She ran until she went down a narrow part of the cave that the dragon couldn't reach. She spoke to her regardless and mocked her. She won't make it that far and will die soon when she catches her. While Eloise was down there, she found more pieces of clothing, and written on the wall were the names of all the women sacrificed before her. Too many were sacrificed, and Elodie was devastated at the thought of really not making it out alive. Elodie checked on the large wound on her legs and took a rest for a while. However, she slept restlessly as she dreamed of what the other women must have been like when they were in her position. Victoria, a victim of this ritual, looked at her and muttered that everything was a lie. When Elodie woke up from her nightmare, she panicked upon seeing the glowworms attaching themselves to the wound on her leg. At first, she panicked and tried to get them off herself, but she calmed down when she realized that the glowworms actually healed her wound. She checks it by putting them on one of her scratches, and the glowworm immediately heals her. Elodie then apologized for underestimating them. While wandering in the cave, she came across a map that shows an escape from the cave. Elodie studied the map drawn on the wall and continued on her journey. There was a room with 3 paths, and Elodie chose the middle fork, just like what she saw on the map. Then she heard music notes and found the crystals that would indicate she was close to the exit. She drops tears in a sense of relief and tells herself, this is the moment of truth. When Elodie found a crown on the ground with the letter V engraved on it, she was glad to know that Victoria, the woman in her dream, had made it out alive. Now she feels even more encouraged to save herself from this horror. She tore her dress apart and wrapped her hands and feet with it. This is because the crystals are sharp and will cut her on her way up. This is to minimize those cuts. Elodie, now using the crown as a ledge, starts to climb the bright crystals. Her hands are hurting, but she doesn't give up yet. However, the dragon appears behind her and mocks her as before. She encourages her bravery to escape and mocks her for flying like the little birds. She continues climbing regardless, which indeed makes her wake up. Now feeling safe, she heads straight to the exit she is seeing. However, she soon realizes that she made the wrong assumption. She discovers that the exit wasn't an actual exit, just an opening located so high up in the mountain. She falls to the ground, heartbroken and tearful. She also realizes that the woman in her dreams, Victoria, never escaped. It turns out that she just looked for an easier death than being burned or eaten alive. Elodie suddenly sees a bunch of men from a distance approaching the mountain. She screams at the top of her lungs and calls out in the hopes of getting their attention, but suddenly the dragon emerges from nowhere and jumps onto her. To her luck, the opening was small, and she couldn't let the dragon pass. This gave Elodie a chance to back up and save herself. The dragon continued to tell her there was no way out for her or any other of the princesses. She also mentioned that 3 were taken, so 3 must be taken. She doesn't understand what she was talking about, but she was definitely scared to find Victoria's decayed body next to her. Victoria never jumped, she was burned alive right at the spot where Elodie is now. Shortly, when the dragon was about to release a fire, he heard a bunch of men screaming their names. Those men were the ones she saw earlier and were her father, the bellow, and his men. The dragon leaves her there and shifts her attention to the men. The scene then shifts to them, where they managed to enter the cave using ropes. They knew it was deadly to come here, but the bellow insists on finding his daughter, Elodie. Elodie also made her way down and headed to the men who called her name. On her way, she came across a larger room, where she found the remains of 3 baby dragons. Their eggs were surrounded by heavy gold jewelry and coins that belonged to the dragon. Elodie was horrified upon realizing that Queen Isabel's story was completely false. The truth was that the king attacked the dragon's lair and unprovoked the dragon's children. When the dragon's eggs hatched, 3 baby dragons emerged with much valued gold. The king then ordered his men to slay the vile young and take the wealth to their kingdom. However, they were soon captured by the parent dragon, and it burned them all except the king. The king begged the dragon to spare him and show mercy. Although the dragon was mad at the incident, she wanted the king to feel her pain. The dragon indeed spared him, but with a price. As 3 were taken, 3 must be given as a sacrifice. The scene then comes to an end, and Elodie hears her father calling out for her. She is afraid that the dragon will hear them and come to attack, but she can't communicate with them. Shortly, the dragon appears and attacks one of the men, throwing him from a height. Chaos ensued when it continued to step on one of them and made her graceful appearance to the bellow. Bellow pleads that he is here to get his daughter back. And then he tries to stab the dragon with the sword in his hands. That's foolish of him because the dragon is a dragon that can take him easily with her tail, hanging him upside down. The dragon doesn't take action and only orders the man to call out for his daughter. The man is surprised to know Elodie is alive. Meanwhile, Elodie is looking at all of this, hiding from afar. However, the bellow doesn't call his daughter out, rather, he confesses that he's sorry to choose his people over his daughter. She hears this and feels sorry for him, but the dragon immediately lays her feet on the bellow's chest and stabs him with her claws. The insertion is the most painful part, and when Elodie hears her father's pain, she shouts for it to stop. The dragon hears this and is alerted to her presence. She tries to hide and keep quiet right where she is, and the dragon leaves in the other direction. She then approaches her father to comfort him in his last moments. Before he dies, the bellows tell her there are men waiting for her on the ship outside. Elodie then kisses goodbye to her dead father and leaves, using the rope her father used to come down. As she was climbing up the rope, the dragon noticed her and came onto her. She breathes her fire behind her, but Elodie manages to run fast and escape the cave. Outside, she takes her father's horse and rides it back to the castle. However, the dragon is just behind her, flying above her head. She jumps off the horse and hides on a rock, but the dragon breathes fire onto the horse anyway. The scene shifts back to the castle, where the queen sees this and is livid, knowing that the dragon's anger could only mean the sacrifice had escaped. At night, Elodie spends the night hiding inside the rocks while the dragon burns down the area. Queen Isabel also headed to the ship where Floria and Lady Bayford were. She then captures Floria without the stepmother's consent. Isabel is taking Floria to replace her sister on the sacrifice. When the mother objected, one of the men stabbed her before leaving. Lady Bayford, despite her stab wound, still headed to the mountain to save Floria. On her way, she finds Elodie and tells her what happened the other night. Elodie insists on going back to rescue her sister, and so she does. Elsewhere, the queen is repeating the sacrifice ceremony. However, her son Henry refused when she wanted to cut his hand for the pact. He said Floria is too young for sacrifices, and she's just a child. The queen told him he was weak before cutting her own hands and packing her blood with Floria's, and the guards threw her into the cave. Shortly after, Elodie went to where the sacrifice was happening, but it was too late, and she knew that her sister was already at the bottom of the cave, replacing her for the sacrifice. She went down the chasm again, this time willingly, and gathered some glowworms to heal some of her wounds. She took some for her sister. She also cut her hair and used it to set up a booby trap before grabbing her father's sword, ready to rescue her sister Floria. Meanwhile, the dragon was guarding Floria while waiting for Elodie to come for her sister. Shortly, the dragon heard a clanging from a distance, which was actually just Elodie's booby trap. She quickly flew to where the sound came from. When she sees her departure, Elodie quickly runs to her sister. She managed to help her sister hide before the dragon came back. Shortly after, when the dragon realizes that Elodie is back and has fooled her with a booby trap, he growls in anger. When Elodie hears her, she suggests that Floria hide as she has to confront the dragon and tell the whole truth. When the dragon found Floria hiding, Elodie seized the opportunity to point the sword at the dragon's eye. The dragon mocked her, stating that the sword wouldn't kill her but would make her angry. But killing the dragon wasn't Elodie's plan because she knows that, just like her, the dragon was just wrong too. Elodie tried to explain the truth to the dragon. The girls she was killing were not the daughters of the king who killed her baby dragons but instead random daughters from another kingdom. Elodie tried to explain the truth to the dragon, but it only angered the dragon, who refused to believe that Elodie was speaking the truth. She believes that their kind were never innocent. Regardless of Elodie's claim of telling the truth, the dragon exhaled the burning fire onto Elodie. Elodie falls from the cliff, burned, but she falls to the lake above her. The water quickly splashed on the fire she had caught. Fortunately, she was fine and managed to swim out of the water, except that her legs and hands were severely burned. Meanwhile, her sister throws and holds her Baylord's sword. This revived her hope, and when she runs towards it, the dragon appears from nowhere and pins her to the ground. When the dragon was about to stab her, Elodie managed to take over before her and stab her several places with the sword. The dragon lay weakly on the ground, and Elodie seized the moment to explain the truth. She wasn't of royal blood and that she was just used by the royal family. However, the dragon is still unconvinced and thinks Elodie is telling a lie. At the final moment of Elodie's defeat, she unexpectedly notices some trick that can make the dragon have a taste of its medicine. She sees a concave-shaped rock in front of her and notices how it is deflecting the dust. She heads towards and places herself right at the spot and faces the dragon. The dragon continues to tell her to accept her fate, mocking her. She insists the dragon take action and burn her, and so the dragon does and breathes her fire onto her. This time, Elodie jumps to the side, and the fire deflects onto the dragon itself. It burns his face and part of his body. It growls in pain and agony while Elodie stands beside it, watching it silently. When the dragon falls down weakly, she approaches it and shows her hand to it. She further explains that the cut is how the family turns the girls into royal blood. That is how the dragon is fooled into smelling the blood of his real enemies and thinking the girls are their descendants. The dragon now seems to be helplessly convinced, and instead of killing him, Elodie uses the glowworms to heal the dragon's wounds. The scene shifts to the next morning at the castle. Here, the family is serving a third wedding ceremony for another victim. Elodie rolls the coin she was given right at the feet of the king and queen. Isabel picks it up and realizes it's indeed Elodie, who is still alive. She appears exhausted but brave enough to confront them. Henry walks up to her to explain himself, as if he didn't just marry two women and throw them into the chasm as a sacrifice. But Queen Isabel stops him from standing firm. Elodie then turns her face to the bride and tells her to take her family and run for her life. While they ran, Isabel said Elodie shouldn't feel heroic just because she managed to escape the dragon. But Elodie scoffs and reveals the higher power they should fear. She also offered the other attendees one last chance to flee. Some listened and ran away in fear, while others didn't and were just there in confusion. Shortly, the dragon appeared in the sky and burned all the royals up to the point where their gold crowns melted on their faces. The dragon also burned the castle, ending the story of the kingdom of Aurea. Elodie walked on the bridge with the dragon flying over her as the palace burned down behind them. The movie comes to a close as we see the family of Bayford return to their ship and head back home with the dragon. The end.